It's time for Your Valuable Home.
All right, Ron, we're back with the coolest neighborhoods in America, and I believe we're staying on the West Coast, correct?
We are on the West Coast. On a trip to L.A. a few years ago, I've been there a lot. I spent a wonderful day in Pasadena and walked through a magical neighborhood. The place is really cool. Neighborhood called Bungalow Heaven. So Bungalow Heaven is graced with many, many fine examples of two distinctive architectural styles of homes. The arts and crafts home and the related Craftsman style home. Incidentally, the name Pasadena resulted from a contest held by settlers from Indiana, of all places, to name their town. Pasadena means crown of the valley. The San Gabriel Valley is at the foothill of the San Gabriel Mountains, which is always pointed out to you when they do the Rose Bowl parade. So many of Pasadena's original 1- and 2-story arts and crafts and craftsman houses that remain occupied today were built between 1890 and 1929. Bungalow Heaven is cherished by the people who own homes there, and they're very proud of their neighborhood. It's incredible. It's a common element in every story we're doing in the series. And we have two longtime Bungalow Heaven residents with us today. There's Carol, a former resident of Pittsburgh, PA, who graduated from Penn State, attended grad school in California and stayed. That was how many years ago, Carol?
It's been 40 years in California.
40 years in California, and you must like it there, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We love it here.
Okay.
But, it's a lot different than Pennsylvania.
Okay, and then there's Juan, whose military family made a move to San Diego, and he found his way up to Bungalow Heaven. And that was how many years ago, Juan?
I've been in Bungalow Heaven for 22 years now. We made our way to this area in the mid-90s.
And both of you are proud to say you live in arts and crafts homes, and they're gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, what was the initial attraction to Bungalow Heaven, and do you still feel that way today, 40 years later?
My husband and I attended the Bungalow Heaven Home Tour way back in 1991. We had been starting to look to buy a house, and I loved the Craftsman house that I was renting because it reminded me of my grandmother's house back in Pittsburgh. But at that time, I didn't know anything about architecture. So we went on this home tour to learn. And once we finished the tour and saw Bungalow Heaven, the homes and the people, we decided immediately that this was the place for us. So we told our poor real estate agent that they could only show us homes in Bungalow Heaven. And within a year, we had our 1909 transitional Victorian Craftsman home. And we thought this was going to be our first starter home, but now we would never consider living anywhere else. Within a year of being in the neighborhood, we were on the Bungalow Heaven Board of Directors. We've been volunteering on the home tour since 1993, and we've made so many friends throughout the neighborhood. So one of the founding members of Bungalow Heaven used to have this saying, "Come for the architecture, stay for the people." And so that perfectly describes what happened to us.
Yeah, I can understand it. I mean, I spent an afternoon walking around there. I didn't actually take the formal walking tour or anything. It's a magical place, and it's not too far from Colorado Boulevard, right?
It's a few blocks up. I mean, it's not something that you would walk every day, but it's walkable to Colorado Boulevard.
Juan, how about you? You've been there a while, too. Is the attraction the same today as it was when you first arrived there?
Oh, absolutely. I can't imagine living in another place. So we've got deep roots here, and this is my home. This is my tribe, so to speak. This is my culture. The way we came about to it was a little bit similar to Carol's journey and story. And what had happened for us is my wife and I were looking for finally deciding to buy real furniture, so to speak, instead of having that attitude that you would have when you're younger of having an end table be a cardboard box that's covered by a tablecloth or something like that. And we were starting to think, well, what do we like in terms of a style? And we didn't have the vocabulary to explain it at this point. But what we really came out to was just simple, clean lines in our furniture, straight rectilinear, no fancy ornamentation or anything like that, just very straightforward. But we couldn't describe it. And at the time, there was an intersection of things happening in our lives. It happened to be the introduction to the Gamble House, a very famous arts and crafts house here in Pasadena that's a house museum, and also an event that was happening at the same time that's put on by our local preservation organization called Pasadena Heritage. And for years, they had put on an annual conference in the fall called Craftsman Weekend. And it was all things Craftsman and everything that you wanted to learn about that. And so we finally found our people, so to speak, that could describe what we were looking for in the architecture. And they said, hey, you got to go check out Bungalow Heaven. That's what you're looking for. And kind of like what happened with Carol is we started going up and down the neighborhood every weekend looking for open houses, and we wanted to live there. We wanted to live in Bungalow Heaven. And the rest is history.
What is the strict definition and origin of an arts and crafts house, and the difference between that and the architectural genre called Craftsman style house?
You know, the way I come to understand it is really the term arts and crafts has evolved over the years, and it encompasses craftsman homes as well. It's absorbed that. So it's really an umbrella term, the way I see it. The arts and crafts movement, I don't know if you know anything about it, but really it had started in England in the late 1850s as a reaction to industrialism. And the whole idea of arts and crafts was a return to craftsmanship, the guilds of medieval times, in returning to goods that are well made instead of industrially made and cheap made or made by factories. And it moved into taking over aspects of architecture, of textiles, of art itself, of household goods, decorative art. And it moved into that. And so then as it moved out of England and into the United States, it was taken over by a gentleman by the name of Gustav Stickley, which is a furniture manufacturer, furniture designer. He took it over. He started his enterprises with respect to furniture making and with respect to a magazine that promoted the arts and crafts philosophy called the Craftsman magazine. Through his enterprises, what happened is he moved into designing houses and started to provide designing houses around 1903, 1904. He put out his house designs, which were called Craftsman house designs, under the name of the Craftsman Enterprises. The term Craftsman house originally is a term that is associated with his enterprises, his business. So when you hear the term Craftsman house, that's where that comes from. And the Craftsman houses that he designed were of all kinds of materials: cement, logs, bricks, shingles, all kinds of materials, typically two-story houses, but was all returned to an emphasis on local materials, using what's on the land, being very conscientious about locally made materials to go ahead and create your home. Over the years, that term has evolved as language evolves over the years, and Craftsman has been absorbed into talking about it as bungalows. In particular, a lot of our houses out here in Southern California, while they're bungalows, they are referred to generically as a Craftsman house now or an arts and crafts house.
Okay. Well, let me ask the both of you. Do both of you have Stickley?
I have modern Stickley that has been made recently. I have a few pieces of original Stickley, and then the rest of my furniture is a combination of other manufacturers of the period, and mostly Lifetime. We basically at this point have our entire home furnished with furniture that is either of the period or that is a reproduction of the period.
Gotcha. Juan, how about you?
We have mostly antiques in our house. It was, our idea to furnish it with furniture of the period. However, sometimes we have a blend, and the manufacturers that Carol had mentioned are in my house as well. The antiques that people want to furnish their homes with in this style can get sometimes prohibitively expensive. And so you have to go to alternative means and go to contemporary furniture makers that are working in that style, in that design, and sometimes get those because they're more fitting for our budget in terms of affordability.
How many homes make up Bungalow Heaven, and how many of them are considered arts and crafts or craftsman style homes?
So there are 1,062 homes that are directly facing the street. There's a total of 1,166 buildings in the neighborhood, but the rest of those are back houses, sometimes called granny flats. 55% of the ones that are facing the street are in the Craftsman style, with the next largest group, about 30% of the houses, they're in the revival styles, like colonial revival, Mediterranean, English, or Tudor revivals. One of the interesting things about the arts and crafts era homes is that the style sort of evolved as the owners and the builders, like sort of the designer builders, made their own interpretations of the style. And so because of the cost of architects, they usually did not use architects for the homes in our neighborhood, but therefore our neighborhood sort of has a richer variety of interpretations of the style based on the hundreds of people that were building these homes.
And I would add to that, within our region, the great influencer in the region would be Charles and Henry Green, the architects of the famous Gamble House. And it's their design elements that seem to have spread the seeds in terms of design elements throughout this region. And so their influence upon the many design build firms or design build individuals can be present in many of the bungalows you'll see in Bungalow Heaven or even regionally. A very well-known local researcher in the region by the name of John Ripley has hypothesized that the influence of Green and Green and spreading their design elements throughout the city and throughout the Los Angeles region has been numerous. And I think most of the time we really point to Charles and Henry Green for the most part, setting the tone for the design that you see that is so present in bungalows in the Pasadena and Los Angeles area.
You mentioned the Gamble House. What's the story behind the Gamble House? And it's the same architectural style, correct?
It does fit into the arts and crafts style. It's sometimes hard to explain it. If you had to go ahead and slot it, you would slot it in the arts and crafts style. And the Gamble House is a house that was designed in 1907 by the architects Charles and Henry Green, and it was designed for David and Mary Gamble of the Procter & Gamble Company. They had come out to Pasadena, and Pasadena during the late 1800s and early 20th century was well known as a resort town, a tourist town. And lots of families from the Midwest and the East Coast would come out here from about November to May for the mild winter climate, and they would stay here. They would stay in the various resort hotels in the area during that time frame. And some of them, though, had been regulars, like the Gambles, and would come out here on a regular basis for the winter months. And so the frequency of coming out here so often, they had decided to go ahead and have a winter home designed for them. And so the Gamble House was the winter residence of David and Mary Gamble. It is a symphony in wood, so to speak. It is referred to by aficionados of the Gamble House as an ultimate bungalow. The design elements all in there are all reflective of the arts and crafts philosophy. It's a home that can be toured year-round. It's kind of like the Mecca for people that are fans of arts and crafts. They have to make a pilgrimage to the Gamble House because really a lot of the design elements that you see in the Gamble House really set the tone for the arts and crafts movement. It's a very prominent house museum that's open for touring.
Does Bungalow Heaven have the greatest concentration of arts and crafts houses, homes in the U.S.?
If we were going to look at it locally and talk about it with respect to the city of Pasadena, we are the largest landmark district in the city of Pasadena, and we are also the first landmark district in the city of Pasadena. Bungalow Heaven set the tone for what would come afterwards in terms of landmark districts being designated throughout the city of Pasadena.
And of the remaining homes there, is there any other dominant architectural style?
We have a lot of the revival styles. Those are homes mostly built in the 1920s and 30s, and they're quite well integrated in amongst the Craftsman style homes. And in our annual home tour, we often feature many of those homes as well as the Craftsman style homes. The next largest concentration is what we would call sort of like minimal traditional or ranch styles from the 1930s to the 1950s. There's fewer of those, and then there's onesies, twosies of things like Victorian and transitional and a few other styles. But the revival styles are almost as easy to spot as the Craftsman homes in our neighborhood.
The typical arts and crafts home and Craftsman home occupies a pretty compact footprint, doesn't it? How big are they?
Typically, they're around 1,200 to 1,400, because we've got a lot of one-story homes throughout the neighborhood. We do have a few larger ones, of course, too, but I would say somewhere between 1,200, maybe 1,500 in terms of square foot.
Just give us a general description of your home, Carol.
My home is a transitional Victorian Craftsman in a style that's sometimes called a Swiss chalet. It has elements of Victorian, like the kind of stickwork in the eaves and steeply pitched roofs, mixed in with Craftsman elements like chunky Arroyo stone boulder and clinker brick columns on the front porch. And it's kind of a quirky house. It's got a Victorian entry hall, which you would never find in a Craftsman, but it's got Craftsman-style colonnades dividing the living room from the entry hall. A colonnade is kind of a little partial wall that's topped with a post. It usually contains bookcases, and it's a very typical Craftsman feature, but those are usually between the living room and the dining room. We've got a lot of interior woodwork and built-ins, which feel very much like the Craftsman style. And fortunately, no one has ever painted the woodwork, and so we were very, very lucky to not have to do a whole lot of stripping of paint except for the kitchen and the bathroom. It's 1.5 stories. We've got 3 bedrooms and our single bathroom upstairs. But the main feature that sold me on this house was our built-in buffet in the dining room that has these beautiful leaded glass doors and milk glass windows in the drawers. And after I saw that buffet, I just couldn't think of any other house. In addition, we've got all kinds of other built-ins, like there's 4 built-in benches, a built-in desk with a hidden Murphy bed below it, and throughout the floors are the typical Douglas fir, which is in most of the houses in our neighborhood, as well as some oak floors in the living room and the dining room. It's just a really complicated and quirky and beautiful home.
In addition to the built-ins, is there a lot of paneling on the walls too, wooden paneling?
There is wainscoting in the dining room, which I wouldn't necessarily call paneling. It goes halfway up the wall.
Right.
It was sort of board and batten. And then in the living room, we just have the little boards with plaster in between them. Or maybe Juan's going to tell me those are the battens. We've used reproduction period wallpaper in as many rooms as we can to try to recreate that feeling of what the house looked like when it was first built.
Well, Carol, I got a question for you. Being a contractor, you have a house you just bought in Bungalow Heaven. You want to redo it. And I was reading something about the COA that you have to abide by. Could you explain that?
That's the Certificate of Appropriateness. The Bungalow Heaven Landmark District is administered by the city of Pasadena, and we have a conservation plan that governs what changes are permitted to be made to the houses in the neighborhood to areas that can be visible from the public right-of-way, the street, or any alleys. And so homeowners are encouraged not to change anything because we value and cherish the original features of our homes, including and almost particularly the original wooden windows and the siding and everything else. And so if a homeowner wants to make a change, if they need to repair something or to restore something that had been changed before the Landmark District came into play, then they fill out a form for the city explaining what they're going to do, this certificate of appropriateness. And then the city design and historic preservation staff evaluate that and work with the homeowners to determine what they can do that would still respect the conservation plan for the neighborhood. And so it's a very common process. I've done it many times with my home when we've had to do some restoration or an addition in the back or whatever. And you just work with the city to make sure that changes aren't made to the neighborhood that would detract from the historic character that we so cherish.
Very wise way to go. It has to do primarily with the exterior of the home, correct?
Exclusively with the exterior. Yes.
Juan, how about your house? Can you describe your house for us?
My house is a 1914 bungalow. It was built by one of the designers that happened a little bit more frequently in the neighborhood by the name of George Palmer Telling. It's a typical one-story, right smack into the heyday of the bungalow, where some houses will have a vertical thrust to them and have a vertical orientation in their character. Mine spreads out. Like one of the first things you'll encounter on the exterior upon the front of the house is the front porch. The front porch is really like a stage. It's just straight across the full width of the front of the house, and it's anchored by these 2 massive porch pillars, which are trapezoidal in its geometry, and it is clad in rough shingles. And the woodwork is of this heavy, beefy, dimensionally sized wood, and it's rough hewn to give a rustic character to it. We got 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. It's a very small footprint, but it's got a lot of great built-ins, like the colonnade that Carol was speaking about. We have that. The woodwork is stained in the living room and the dining room for that really cozy, manly type of feel. We've got lots of built-ins, and we've got the original windows, which are a character-defining feature. Yeah, one of the things that is really neat about our house is we have what are known in the back, in the bedrooms. They're known as Pullman car windows, they're pocket windows or drop windows. In other words, what will happen is you'll open up the window stool and then the window will drop right down into the wall pocket, just like a pocket door, except it moves up and down vertically. It's just like a railway car window, and you can just move it right down and then push the window stool shut, and it's hidden. That's why we call it pocket windows or hidden windows. On really warm days, summer days or late spring, someone who's in that room will just drop all the windows down, and we've got windows on two sides, and it'll create a nice cross breeze. But we've got a lot of wainscoting in there too, a nice buffet in the dining room, a very warm and cozy fireplace that we sit by on days like this. We're very appreciative of owning the house.
Do you get up every morning with the realization that you live in an iconic neighborhood? Are you constantly aware of that?
I am certainly constantly aware of it because I spend so much time making sure that it stays the way it is. And I also so enjoy the fact that because of the landmark district and because of the neighborhood association, I know so many of the people that live in this neighborhood. When I walk up and down the streets for exercise, I'm constantly waving hello to people that I know, and we talk to each other frequently. And I realize this is sort of rare these days to be so closely connected to a community that you live in. And so I never take that for granted. I love it when I walk by Mar Vista once a week. They have little gatherings out on the street where all the neighbors get together and talk. And my neighborhood has a block party. The neighborhood association sponsors movies in the park and Halloween parades and Easter egg hunts and all sorts of different events and activities where people can get together and talk and know each other. And I really do feel that this is a gem of a neighborhood that is not so common anymore.
I've felt this in all these interviews that we're doing. It's a hyper pride about the neighborhood and about taking care of and preserving the neighborhood.
I would agree with that. I take pride in living in Bungalow Heaven. Come for the architecture and stay for the neighborhood. I think stay for the people. That is true. And I take pride and I am grateful every day that I live in this community, in this neighborhood. And I love getting together with people and taking pride in our homes, taking pride in the gatherings that we have available, such as the home tour and many various events that the Bungalow Heaven Neighborhood Association put on to create community, whether it's a snow day or it's a gathering on the 4th of July, or it's a Halloween costume contest. All events that we offer. I take pride, and I'm often boasting with pride because I'm filled with pride about we live in the best neighborhood in Pasadena. Well, I feel we set the tone for preservation efforts in the city, and we set the tone for the way landmark districts should carry themselves out. I feel we are in the vanguard when it comes to that kind of stuff. And other neighborhoods, they look to us. They reach out to Carol or Tina Miller or various individuals in our neighborhood for ways they need to go ahead and run things within their own neighborhood. And so I don't take that for granted because it is not typical. And I notice it a lot when I will visit other areas, say in the country or even regionally. The infrastructure that they have here in Pasadena, in Los Angeles, is on a different level. Not to say that other neighborhoods don't have it. They have preservation efforts and everything, but I am just grateful that I live in the community and the neighborhood and the city that I do.
Yeah, I would say that people in other areas of the country, whether it's Texas, the Carolinas, wherever, if they want to preserve their community and it's worth preserving the way you have, they ought to look to Bungalow Heaven for guidance. Homes don't come up for sale too often, do they?
People have to move at times because of their jobs or because they want to be closer to family. And so we've got a lot of really long-term residents that have been here for decades, some for 50 years. But we do have on the order of 40 to 50 homes every year that are sold in the neighborhood. I kind of have that number just because we have new neighbor packets that we can distribute to people and reach out to new neighbors to, welcome them to the neighborhood or, invite them to come on the home tour. And so it's on the order of, at least in typical years, 40 to 50 homes turnover. The home tour is the last Sunday in April every year. We've been running it for over 30 years. It is the primary way that we raise funds for the neighborhood association, but it's also primarily meant to educate the public about arts and crafts homes and historic neighborhoods. And we have usually on the order of 8 houses that are open for people that they can tour. And the houses are filled with docents that explain the features of the homes. And then outside on the streets, we've got demonstrators showing different techniques. We've got refreshment stands with homemade cookies that are baked by the neighbors. We've got musical groups and sometimes trolley tours or accompanying lectures or garden tours. It's kind of like a large neighborhood festival. We even have food trucks and things for folks to enjoy when they're here. It's a great day in the neighborhood. We use about 150 volunteers from the neighborhood to work the tour on that day and welcome on the order of 1,000 people from across the country.
And where do people find out about it?
bungalowheaven.org, and there will be a link to take you to information about this year's home tour.
Carol, Juan, thank you very much for sharing the story of the wonderful place you live. That's this week's podcast. Your Valuable Home comes to you every week on the new Pod City Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, and all other popular podcast directories.
If you want us to share your home improvement project or horror story, email me at kevin@yourvaluablehome.net. That's kevin@yourvaluablehome.net. And don't forget to tell your friends and family about Your Valuable Home, the weekly podcast that's all about building wealth in residential real estate and hiring the right contractor to do the right job at the right price.